Great. So welcome everyone to Metagov seminar. Thank you all for being here. I'm very, very excited to introduce our speakers today. So it looks like we have both Tommie and Jennifer to share today on the Choral Data Trust. This is a project that I feel like I've heard about it for a while. I've heard of y'all's work on this, but really when the white paper came out, I was like, wow, this is kind of one of the um, first real like thorough examples of a data trust that I've seen and that I really am excited to learn more about the research and the work. So I think data governance is obviously a big interest to a lot of folks in our space. So it feels really awesome and right and timely that y'all are here, and I can't wait to learn. So please take it away. And thanks again for coming.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Val. I don't know, Jen, if you want to share either the shared screen or, yeah. Okay, brilliant.
Oh yeah, and I'll
Perfect.
just throw out there and say presentation will be about 30, 40 minutes, and we'll have the rest of the time for Q&A. If you have questions throughout, feel free to type them in the chat, and then I'll help kind of facilitate the Q&A once the presentation's over. So type your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and then we'll get to them in the last 20 minutes. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's brilliant to be here. It's very nice to be part of and finally have joined the Metagov Slack. So look forward to being more involved in the future. But just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Tommie Introna. I'm an R&D platform producer at Serpentine. Serpentine is a public art gallery in London. We have a real building, which is where I am now. So if you're ever in London, you should come visit us. But alongside of our exhibition program that we're known for, we also have various other programs that are very important to us, is ecologies program, civic program, and also the technology program, which is where I'm based. So the arts technologies, we've been a department for around 12 years. And we explore different ways that artists are working with technology and different ways that technology is influencing the way artists are working. So our department is split between two kind of key areas of work. So we have the commissioning side of things, where we're commissioning and producing major new works using advanced technologies. And then we also have a thread, which is our R&D program, which is where I'm mostly situated, which is focusing on the building 21st century cultural infrastructure. We've done this through research, through developing prototypes, through publishing strategic briefings for this sector. So I'll drop in some links as kind of we go. So if you want to follow up with some of our other work, you can. Today we're talking about the Choral Data Trust Experiment. I'm saying so inverted commas there, which we'll come to later, whether it is a trust or not. But I should just, before we start, acknowledge that the project was developed by a brilliant team that includes my colleagues at Serpentine, Victoria Ivanova, Ava Yeager, Ruth Waters, but also Mercedes Buns from King's College London, the artists Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, obviously, and of course, the brilliant Jennifer Ding, who is with us today. So maybe, Jen, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tommie, and great to be here today with all of you. So I'm Jen. I work at an AI data infrastructure startup in London, but I was very lucky to join this project as the data steward. And previously, I was on the open science team at the Turing Institute. So hi, Alex. Good to see you from there. And Liz, I've actually heard a lot about you from Stuart Lynn, who I worked very closely with while I was at Turing. So really lovely to be here today and to share about this work with the Serpentine on the Choral Data Trust Experiment. So to kick us off, Tommie has already introduced a few themes that are really relevant to the project, but really what this project tapped into were two age-old traditions in the UK, and those are community choirs and UK trust law. So really exploring some themes around collective data governance, tapping into different legal frameworks such as trust law, UK GDPR, UK performers' rights to explore how we can also give any governance framework some teeth. And as the name very much implies, it was also very much an experiment. So we started thinking that a trust was going to be our form, and then we ended with trust in inverted commas, as Tommie mentioned. So trust itself was a concept very important to our experiment, but as we'll get into later, we ended up actually exploring some new legal vehicles around the framework for our governance. So let me jump straight into the plan for today. We'll start with a little bit about the art exhibit and the research project, the Choral Data Trust Experiment that took place alongside. Then I'll present the part of the research that I led, which was around building capacity for data governance, then hand over to Tommie to share more on our legal frameworks that we prototyped and some future work for the governance of our data set. So the call was an amazing exhibition that recently closed, ran from October until February of this year. And it was with the artists Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. And quite a lot of the actual art exhibit that went into the art production was all part of the art, if you will. So the artist composed a songbook of hymns that was purpose-built for collecting a training data set for a choral AI voice model. So both the creation of the music, the recording of the music, the setting up of this collective data governance framework, and all the questions around the governance of the data, the use of the model, have all really been central to this project. And really what we have focused on is what Tommie's colleague Victoria calls live action role-playing or LARPing good faith AI development. So what does it look like when the builders of the models, the contributors of the data, are all interested in shifting the power dynamic or changing the status quo so that data subjects or data contributors to AI models actually have more opportunities for empowerment. And a lot of this was centered around this provocation from Holly, as you can see on the slide. And the provocation really was, can we develop some more empowering and new and better rituals around what the process of creating AI is like? And just like coordinating voices in a choir, the artist really saw AI as a possible coordination technology as well. So here is a few snapshots from the process itself. You can see some of the songbooks on display from the exhibition. There was also this interesting design of the ambisonic mic recording layout. So we could collect really high quality data that would future-proof the data set, if you will, for future model development. And finally, you can see a nice snapshot from one of the recording sessions. Of course, it's important to mention the 15 UK choirs from across the UK who answered the call and decided to join the recording sessions and contribute to the data set. I think many of them didn't realize how much they were getting into regarding the governance part of the experiment, but they have been amazing, both on the artistic side and jumping on board to have some really complex conversations about data governance. So moving on to that section, we had a very tight timeline here around what we had in mind between when the project started in April and when the exhibit opened in October. There's quite a bit of different forms of engagement that we explored, from one-on-one conversations, open sessions on Zoom, and then we ended up running a few surveys, one using just a classic Google Forms layout and the second one using Polis to try to extract different forms of preferences around things like data sharing, around licensing, and also around governance itself, how the choirs were interested in making decisions about the data set moving forward. our goals were really these three. So, it's not very common that people within the same data set necessarily think of that as a collective identity, but we wanted to explore what it might look like to enable some of that identity formation. And with that identity formation, explore opportunities to build capacity for collective action among the choirs to make decisions about the data set. It was very important to us that we didn't come in choosing a specific form, whether that was a trust, a cooperative, etc., but rather that the form itself would be driven by the preferences from the community. And finally, it was also really important for the team that any sort of governance framework would be backed with some sort of legal vehicle. Some quotes from our choir members around that have surfaced from the engagement, thinking about how it feels to even think about their voices as data or raw material for training AI models. Some really interesting themes came out around how they felt about this process to begin with. I think many of them really didn't, as live performers, the idea of transforming voice into something digital, let alone something that becomes part of a model, was interesting but scary, as you can see on the screen, but also quite unmusical, disembodied, or soulless. But at the same time, they recognized, a lot of this development is already happening. So if there's an opportunity to use the experiment as a way to frame a best-in-class example or to shape what best practice could look like, that was the opportunity that they found. So jumping into some of the surveys that we actually ran. The first one was a data preferences survey. So this really was around both the collection of the data, the use of the data, and for different purposes. Some interesting highlights from this. So I know this is really small, but this first one here on the left, something interesting that came out of this was the user of the data set really mattered to the choirs. So there was a lot of understanding of what Holly and Matt's intentions were, what the Serpentine's intentions were. So there was trust that was based in that relationship. But we saw that the comfort level dropped significantly when it came to other potential users of the data set to build other models. So I think that contextual understanding and that basis of trust in the relationships and a transparency around the users and use cases was really something highlighted from this survey. Another interesting point was around crediting. So many of them were actually quite ambivalent to being individually credited for the contribution, but felt very strongly that they wanted their choir's contribution to be credited. So I think all of this really told us that some sort of blanket approach to crediting or sharing really wasn't the right fit. It was very nuanced and dependent on the context. So any governance form would need to take that into account. Another interesting finding was that we had originally assumed that many of the choir members were more interested in the artistic aspects of the project and wouldn't be interested in getting involved on the decision-making side. But in fact, they were actually quite interested in getting involved in the decision-making. So with that in mind, we ended up setting up a data governance working group with representatives from each choirs to make decisions going forward. The outcomes for the survey were also quite helpful because we could translate the outcomes into targeted interventions in the model building pipeline. It really raised different priorities that were important for the choirs. And it really centered around transparency, around knowing who has the data, where it's stored geographically, getting to be part of defining unacceptable criteria or behavior for the model, and also setting license terms and defining choir recognition and profit sharing. So that actually leads us really smoothly to the second engagement we ran, which was around using the Polis tool for guiding the kind of license that would be best fit for this data set. So we had 20 seed statements. The participants also submitted a few as well. So I think we ended up with around 25 in the end. And some interesting findings. Overall, we had three clusters that really emerged. Two of them were a bit more risk averse towards wide sharing of the data, and another, group C, was a bit more open towards open sharing of the data for a wide range of use cases. And sorry, I'm realizing these graphs are really small and probably completely illegible, but the white paper has them in a better form if you're interested in seeing more granularly how people voted. But one great thing was, although around for-profit sharing or open sharing, there was more divergence across our three preference groups, we did find a lot of agreement actually for many of the questions. So most of them were interested in sharing the data with those users that were using the data for educational purposes, nonprofit use cases, those who agreed to comply with the license terms, things like that. So what this really indicated to us is, if and when the data set is released, and Tommie will share a little bit more about how we're thinking about that now, the right fit that captures the preferences of the group would be a Creative Commons share alike non-commercial with attribution license, the CC BY NCSA. So that is how we use the policy to guide the selection of a future license. So now I'll hand over to Tommie to share a little bit more about how we then took the outcomes from all of this engagement and the different forms of engagement and translated that into different legal frameworks that we experimented with.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think it's worth maybe just reiterating this about, I guess, the ethos of like the R&D that we do at Serpentine. I think perhaps there's an assumption that what's possible within our art gallery kind of context is broadly speculative, imaginary kind of scope. But really what we're interested in here is prototyping something that, can have real world implications, can inform other sectors. And in order to do that, we really needed to delve deep into the robust kind of legal frameworks that we might be able to draw on to build this kind of collective voice. Jen, would you jump in straight into the first? Sorry, I'm going to have to kind of ask you for that. So exactly which legal mechanisms could enable this collective data governance? And here our aim is to produce the legal basis and a workable infrastructure to enable the governance of the data. And this needs to align with the preferences that Jen has already outlined, whilst being legally sound and some way feasible. And I think that's an important factor, limitation that we're working with. And in the UK, it's not really, and I think this is not unique to the UK, it's not really immediately clear what legal frameworks we can leverage to challenge the current sort of standard way of approaching AI development and increase community agency. But in this case, we drew on two concrete aspects of UK law. So the one is UK performers' rights, and the other is the General Data Protection Regulation, which is GDPR. And we have UK GDPR, which is because we've left the EU, but we still have GDPR. It's effectively exactly the same provision. So most of this, I'm going to kind of delve a little bit into detail, and I know this is very UK specific, but hopefully the way that we've kind of tried to approach this and develop a mechanism that works for us will be transferable to wherever you are. Jen, do you want to jump to the next slide? Performance rights. So under UK law, performers automatically receive intellectual property rights when their performances are recorded. So this, for example, might be to do with like a musician performing on a record. They automatically have an IP right to their performance. They might license that to a company that owns it, but primarily they have that, and they also have a moral right to be attributed as a performer. So we kind of thought this might be something we can build on. The singers are in the choir are performers who are being recorded. So there's some kind of like parallel there that's easy for us to jump onto. And so like the question then is like, okay, who does this right protect? And in this case, all of the choir choristers that took part in the recording sessions had performance rights. Their consent was needed to record their performances and to reproduce these recordings. So to utilize this in our experiment to collectivize this right, we drew up a performance rights agreement. And this grants us the exclusive license to these rights, or at least it puts it in the trust, it grants these rights to the trusted data intermediary. And I'll speak more about that trusted data intermediary formation in a moment. And this really reflects the sort of desires of the choristers that we already established. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks, Jen. So in this agreement, there is a template license agreement, which is what we would use then to sub-license the data set to other developers. There's also details about the government's requirements, which includes transparency, the mode of consultation. If there was a commercial arrangement agreed, then it also details aspects about royalties, and also reasserts their moral right to be attributed as for their group identification to be attributed. Next slide, please. So the other legal framework that we drew upon was UK GDPR. And this comes into play where there is the processing of personal data. So this is typically used, when you're signing cookies and, or signing up to a mailing list. We're all familiar with this by now, hopefully. But here, really, personal data only relates to information that can lead to the identification of an individual. It's a very individualized right. And also only relates to identification. So interestingly, in our experiment, this only protects or relates to a very specific group of the singers, which were the soloists. And apologies, we didn't have time in the beginning to go through the details, but the way that the song was set up was that there were 8 soloists who formed like an inner circle of the singing, and then there was a group, a choir that's in the perimeter that sort of were less identifiable. But the soloists who were close mic'd, their voice, their likeness was much more like identifiable, and therefore the GDPR applies. So this is an agreement that's only really with the soloists. And I'm just looking at the details here. But yeah, so they signed a data rights mandate, which again mandated their GDPR rights to the trusted data intermediary, who could then assert those on their behalf, but they crucially could still exercise those rights individually. Next, please. Thank you. So this is, and you got to excuse, I'm a arts technologies producer, researcher. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm trying to do it justice. But my understanding is that some of the kind of interesting advantages and kind of challenges of doing this kind of mandating of data rights is that it is untested in law. Like there's not necessarily a precedent for it, but it does do some interesting things in terms of collectivizing this right, and also create some kind of interesting kind of benefits for the individuals in that they don't need to manage checking that if their data has been used appropriately. They don't need to necessarily understand the complex technical specifics of data mining, which might be not their interest or skill set. So we, as a trusted data intermediary, can do this work on their behalf. This is a sort of example of, if someone came to us wanting to train a generative AI model that produced hate speech, the data intermediary with these 2 agreements can exercise these rights on their behalf. And it would make it very difficult for the development of an AI voice to take place. Next slide, please, Jen. Okay, this is a kind of crucial slide. There's a lot in this one. But this is really outlining this trusted data intermediary structure and why it's not a trust. Like Jen said, whilst we were always sort of sure that we wanted to establish an organizational entity, we weren't sure exactly what form it would take. And we explored 3 possible legal mechanisms: a individual trustee, a legal trust, or a company limited by guarantee. And within the UK context, at least, there's problems with the individual trustee model and with the trust model. And these really come down to, with the individual trustee, they would be exposed to unlimited personal liability, which, for example, if we had asked Jen to become this trustee, it would have exposed Jen as an individual to potentially a huge amount of risk that would be sort of, unfeasible to, unreasonable to expect an individual to take on. And a corporate entity becoming a trust had some other issues. One being that they would require £100,000 in paid up shares. This is perhaps not a huge amount of money for large organizations, but for smaller community-led organizations or charities or other kind of community organizations that might be wanting to set up some kind of data trust, this felt like not really a reasonable kind of expectation and a sort of, not realistic in practice. There's additional barriers to setting up a trust, such as extensive customs and tax compliance requirements, and other uncertainties whether these rights, the GDPR rights, personal and their performance rights, could actually be transferred to a trust. So ultimately, we selected Serpentine's existing trading company. So this is another kind of key detail, which is that Serpentine is registered as a charity. Our gallery itself is a charitable organization, but we also have a trading company that's sort of like attached to us, which kind of looks after all of our commerce aspects of our, selling books in the bookshop, running the cafe, etc. So we could use this existing trading entity to implement this company limited by guarantee structure. And this is easy to set up. It's limited liability. It's operationally efficient in that we're sort of effectively the same organization. And it means that the trusted data intermediary remains within the gallery, and we have the sort of knowledge and trust kind of built through this project. So whilst being this trusted data intermediary expands the scope of the Serpentine mission, it's potentially a role that other galleries, libraries, archives, museums could play in the future. So I know that was like the biggest, most dense slide, but we can maybe unpack some of that in the conversation afterwards. So Jen, could you jump me over to the next steps? Brilliant. So where are we now? We've, as these projects, it's typical of these projects, there's a huge amount of administrative complexity with working with over 300 choristers and trying to manage the governance. And we're still in the process of collecting all the signatures from the choirs that mandates the Serpentine to exercise these rights. We've got over 60%, which feels pretty good going so far, but there's still some way to go there. And this speaks to some of the complexities of this approach, but it's also an area for further kind of work in terms of streamlining this process or coming up with creative, efficient ways to collect the kind of permissions from the choirs. The next slide, please, Jen. So we've also begun with our data representatives through a survey. The survey, we chose a survey because it was very difficult to organize meetings with a big group of people, but this initial survey was establishing how they want to move forward and also testing some of the initial cases that have come to us. If you go on to the next slide. So we've had like a couple of interests, a couple of people coming up to us within our network who are interested in using the data set. And we posed one of these requests to the data reps to start exploring like how this governance process works in practice. So of the 3 choirs that wanted to kind of consider each proposal individually, only 3 did. The other 6 choirs that responded were happy for us to make that decision on their behalf, but 3 of them wanted to consider each case individually. And here you can see that when kind of considering this open source open model that was that Luther AI wanted to produce, 2 were happy for that to happen and 1 had an issue. And then the sort of next step that we're kind of dealing with that's an interesting challenge now is kind of how do you host this data set like this? How can we fit it within AI pipelines so that it's used and efficient and accessible to the people who have a genuine interest in using it, but can maintain our control over it? And we've explored a couple of options. I've uploaded a sample repo to Hugging Face. You can find it with that link. I can share that. And we've made use of their gated dataset features, which requires manual approval and agreement to the template license. So whilst this is definitely an area for future work because it doesn't feel like entirely satisfactory or like doesn't feel like a perfect system, like we still feel a huge amount of responsibility in uploading this data set and sharing it with anyone, and how we manage that relationship feels like, yeah, it's a whole new range of questions for us to deal with. But there's some potential here, I think, using the gated data sets. Can jump to the penultimate slide, I think maybe the last slide. Oh, sorry, I've already jumped ahead to this slide. This was me talking about the Hugging Face data set. We can go to the next one. Yeah, so I mean, I guess just to conclude a little bit, there's lots of scope here for more research, but I think like what we've tried to prove really is that within the sort of GLAM institutions, the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, there is like a lot of potential for this public AI research, public interest AI research, and the big caveat being that it requires substantial resources and a level of investment for proper data stewardship. And we're hoping that we can kind of keep banging on this drum to show the potential of the kind of work that can be done within the cultural sector, and hopefully get some kind of resources to kind of continue this work. I'll probably, because I know that's gone, we're already at 1:45, so maybe I'll wrap up there. Jen, I don't know if you had any final comments before we jump into some questions. Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This was such a rich presentation. And I must say, the chat is popping off. And thank you, Jen, for getting in there and answering so many questions live. My question was answered and I feel satisfied.
I couldn't even see the chat, so I didn't realize how much chat there was going on. This is great.
Yeah. I'm curious, maybe Jen, actually, if there were any questions, or if you now see what's in the chat even better than I do. So maybe there was a question that you wanted to bring to verbalize and we can discuss.
Sounds great. Maybe I'll share a few thoughts now because I actually have to leave at in 5 minutes. But thank you all for such an interesting discussion in the chat. I think there were quite a few questions about how we had those initial conversations about AI. What even is AI? What even is voice AI? And I just want to share the public deck we ended up making, which is openly available as well. And something that I think was actually quite helpful is we didn't really come from an angle of I don't know, anything is wrong or right, but we just shared the many case studies that exist now and have popped up every month. Some of the participants shared a few as well. So Jacob Collier and what he does in his concerts around creating choirs out of the audience was an interesting case study. We also had OpenAI and the initial release of their voice assistant, which sounded essentially like Scarlett Johansson, exactly. So that was a interesting one to react to as well. But some of our participants also raised examples like there was a country singer, I'm forgetting his name now, but he had a stroke 10 years ago. And essentially was able to release a new single last year using old recordings of his voice. So you can already see across those examples the different levels of empowerment and the different impacts on the original voice contributor to the process, and also how actively they are involved in the process. So with those examples, I feel like we had a really good conversation across the 3 public conversations we had, where people felt like they had a better sense of what they wanted out of the project. Something that was quite interesting was I think there was this almost gut reaction when we start talking about law and rights, that our intention was to actually take away rights or take away power. So there was a lot we had to do and really explain that actually we were trying to do the opposite, and we were trying to rewrite this tendency to just sign away everything. It was a little sad that in some of the first conversations, some of the initial reactions the choirs had were like, oh yeah, just take it all. Like, don't worry, yeah, take it all. We just want to join the project. And we're like, no, wait, actually, we want to do the opposite. So I think thinking about the kind of experiences and tools that can help change that default response to accept all cookies or take all my rights, I think will be an ongoing challenge.
I just want to speak to that a second. I am part of the IEEE P7012 committee, and we are coming up with something we call My Terms, and it's being finalized right now by the IEEE, so that you can have, instead of having to sign away, terms of service that get pushed at we can proactively push our terms of service at all service providers. So, and there's similar structures where I'm working with doctorals with regards to doing all that. So I'm going to connect you with so many people, it's ridiculous. So what's the best way to get in contact with you? That's my question.
Thank you so much, Steve. That sounds brilliant. We'll drop our emails in the chat. That sounds fantastic. And I think just to add to what Jen said, I think some of the power of the initial proposal from Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst was, using choral singing as a kind of effectively like a metaphor for AI training. And this is something I experienced singing in one of the recordings was this sense that it does this interesting thing where you can kind of almost sense that the significance of this, like the whole is more than some of the parts kind of feeling that's true of AI training. And I think it's a useful entry point for people who are not familiar with AI to kind of enter into understanding like what this means, what it means for you as an individual versus the collective, and the value of collectivizing your rights or your bargaining power versus trying to tackle it as an individual. So yeah, just to sort of wanted to add that.
And I'll even throw in that I have an alternate, much more benign form of public protest, which would go perfectly for this, for securing the rights, that has a singing theme that's pre-themed Serpentine already. The Serpentine Street Sing, I will include that as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
I have a question around, and anyone at this point now, if your question has not been answered or you have more questions, feel free to keep sharing in the chat or unmute. But I have a question around like data trust members and kind of the model, like as it continues to grow, because I feel like it's not like, yeah, AI is constantly growing because data sets are constantly growing. And so models are continuously being built and trained and used in the world. And like, I would love to hear about like how data trust members can express their opinions on like ways that models are being used. Um, Jennifer, I feel like you said you have to hop off, so you're probably saying goodbye, but thank you so much.
I think Jen might have already left and it's just frozen on. There we go. So sorry, Valerie, your question about the sort of like, I guess the ongoing updating, the kind of continuous updating of the preferences into the agreements.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it is like a massive challenge with the way that, it's never like a one-way process with model development. And this is, preferences 1 week versus preferences the next, training one model last week and training one the following week. I think that's a massive challenge for us in terms of trying to, assert that our preferences is something that we're going through a big debate in the UK at the moment, is the AI copyright consultation that the government is doing. And they're talking about opt-outs. And there's I think there's something interesting about the challenge of opting out once versus opting out today or tomorrow, last week, the week before. And it's kind of a massive problem. In terms of our project, we set up this, communicating and working with over 300 people on a regular basis is a massive challenge. So we set up this data representative group that has a representative from each choir. And the idea is that we periodically check in with them to check that either that the governance still meets their desires, or to check like new sort of edge cases that might come up or unexpected opportunities, perhaps, something that we haven't considered before. So there's this opportunity for ongoing kind of interaction. But yeah, I think it is a big challenge because these things shift, and you might change your mind whether you wanted to commit last week.
Totally. Well, thanks. Any other questions, folks?
I just wanted to mention there was a talk I saw of Matt talking about have I been trained? So the option we were talking about is people opting in, but this is the opposite of opting out. And he talked about how that was a big project that came out from the call at the Serpentine, but I don't know the background on how that evolved, and if the Serpentine was directly involved, or is that a spin-off? If you want to talk about
that. Have I been trained? It predates the sort of Serpentine collaboration. So that's something that Spawning has been working on for quite a number of years now, I think. I can't remember when they first released it. But it's definitely one of the few examples of anyone who's built like a kind of workable tool for opting out. Whether opt-out is ultimately the best option best option for artists is, it seems to be like now that there's a consensus that opting out is our only choice, but I like to keep the flag flying for opt-in as an option. But no, it's amazing work that they've done, and I think the interesting thing with working with Holly and Matt as collaborators on this project is they are artists, but they're deeply involved in kind of these bigger infrastructural questions around data and how we manage that and across different domains. So they're kind of like the dream kind of partners for the kind of work we want to do, which is really like not just looking at kind of the creative or artistic or technological R&D, but really thinking about the kind of infrastructural questions and how we can contribute to that.
I have not a question, but a comment or a reflection, perhaps, which is just hearing this like really broken down each step in the process. It's so crazy and wild how to contrast this process that y'all have created to what is the standard.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think, again, like this is another interesting thing, I guess, for our department and also Holly and Matt, which is that we're interested at every level of this stack. Like we're interested in, the data collection and the kind of relationship with choirs and building that trust, building that sort of interaction and collaboration, but also interested in the technical development of these models. And so it's kind of like trying to intervene at each stage. And I think that comes back to Holly's kind of provocation at the top there, which is that like if all media is training data, how do we produce beautiful training data, or like how do we produce beautiful processes for and how can we do that? And in order to do that, you need to kind of be involved at every step of the game. It has come up that like this was like an experiment in like good faith AI model development, and the reality is probably more adversarial, where there are competing demands, competing interests that maybe needs more of a like there's more tension and more kind of negotiation needed. This was very like kind of like idealized version, shall we say. So it's interesting to see like how we could push this forward, or perhaps work with other people in the future to sort of see how this plays out in a more adversarial kind of context. The gold standard.
Tommie,
Hopefully. Yes.
To the last point you just made about what it might look like in a more adversarial context. Can you tell us a little bit more about if any soloists or choirs wanted to really exercise their exit option? Like they kind of went through the process, or halfway through it, and they realized, oh man, this is not for me. Like, what did that, like, did that happen? And if so, how did you all navigate that? Is it actually even feasible to extract their data from the broader data set once it's been trained?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It didn't happen as far as I understand. And in terms of like, that removing yourself from the data set, I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, because each choir was recorded individually. So we could kind of, segment it according to each choir and only include the choirs that we had 100% approval, et cetera, et cetera. It does get more complicated once the model's already trained, and like questions about like them wanting to remove themselves from that. As I understand it, the agreements, or the kind of trust that they had in the artists, in Holly and Matt, meant that I think because of the way they approached it, meant that we didn't have these kind of issues. But you saw there in the data preferences in the survey that we recently done, that one of the choirs wasn't interested in sharing their data with this US startup, even though it was a non-profit, open source kind of model development. So there is like dissent, or there is kind of like different opinions. Quite how we deal with that is, I'm not quite sure yet. But yeah, it could have happened, but like I think we were lucky enough not to.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I can imagine, like, if we kind of zoom out a little bit from, as Val said, the gold standard model of this.
Yes.
And just digging into that part, right? It's like, ooh, how do we think through the actual portability, the exit option in terms of this? But I'm so glad you guys didn't have to deal with it. That's very cool too.
No, but I think it's super interesting. I mean, there's huge areas for further research that we haven't done yet, or don't actually ultimately will never have the scope to do. And I think like some of these questions would be amazing to kind of dig deeper into and explore in detail. And also, like you say, we only have 60% of the signatures, and I think there's gaps in what we were able to do. Like, it would have been amazing to work with a designer who kind of like has that experience of like managing preferences and signatures with communities. That's like a whole skill set that we didn't have in this project, and would have been amazing to have. So yeah, there's gaps, but hopefully that's exciting for everyone to jump into.
Thanks, Tommie.
No worries.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Tommie and Jennifer, for joining us. We will end, as we always do, by giving our speakers a round of applause, unmuting, and showing our love. Thank you. Thank you.
So just know yourself. And super last thing, the right wing, if you want more babies in America, expect the
Love
right
TV in the background. That's great.
Thank you
All right,
all.
y'all. Thanks for coming. Have a great
Yeah.
rest of your days, and
Thank
hopefully
you.
see you again at another Metagov seminar soon. Bye, everyone.